On behalf of India International Center, I extend a very warm welcome to all those who are physically present in this room. I also extend a welcome to those who have joined us on YouTube. This event is going online through the sponsorship of Arcus Policy Research set up by Shweta Sani. There are a number of VVIPs in the room. Mr. Manishankar Iyer is here, and there are also several officers who have been associated with India's trade policy, so I am really thankful to them for coming. Mr. Harshvardhan is here. He was Deputy Director General of WTO for a long time, 7-8 years. Sangeeta Godbole is here. And of course, we have the two speakers. Professor Abhijit Das is very well known. Sir, in fact, last year on 20th March, he had delivered a talk here in this very room under the Mapping Sustainable Agriculture lecture series, which I was hosting at that time. And his subject was Trump's America First trade policy, implications and options. It was a fabulous talk, but of course, since then, things have changed so much that it is an entirely new slate today. He has a lot of experience, more than 25 years in trade policy in various capacities, 5 years in Department of Commerce, another 5.5 years in UNCTAD India program, 12 years as head Center for WTO Studies, which has become a notable center for training the trade officers of various other developing countries. It is such a good thing which was done by the government of that time that we must reasonably be proud of the Center for WTO Studies. His recent book, Strategies in GATT and WTO Negotiations, has been published by the Oxford University Press, and it is widely acclaimed. Mr. Ajay Srivastava is very well known today. In fact, anyone who has been reading newspapers or watching, I would not say television channels, because you don't really get news on television channels these days, but anyone who has been watching alternate media would be familiar with his work. After his taking voluntary retirement from the Ministry of Commerce, he set up Global Trade Research Institute, which has been publishing papers regularly on trade matters. So you would have read in the newspapers about various insights into what is happening in trade deals and import, export, impact of war on our exports, and so on. Today's event is chaired by my good friend, Mr. Rajeev Kher, who had a distinguished career in the IAS. He was in UP Cadre. He was collector of Lucknow. You can imagine how important he was in the state government at that time. And then in the Department of Commerce and Industry in the Government of India, he spent more than 10 years. He has an extensive experience in trade negotiations, trade policy. In today's trade negotiations, because everything has gone topsy-turvy due to the war. Iran is facing onslaught of US and Israel, so I'm not going into the details. I will hand over to Mr. Srivastava, who will organize this discussion in a discussion form between him and Mr. Ajay Srivastava. Over to you, sir. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Siraj sir. And it's an absolute honor that this session is being chaired by my former boss and Commerce Secretary, Kher sir. So I start. If we look at, if we consider the joint statement of India and US as a trade deal, then it will be 20th trade deal of India. In addition, we have 6 smaller trade deals called preferential trade agreements. And out of these, 10 have been passed, have been cleared at breakneck speed in the past 5 years. So 10 in 5 years at breakneck speed. That means India is considering FTAs as its major trade strategy for promoting exports. And we are having partners with the East Asian countries, West Asian countries. Almost everybody is our partner, including China, in this journey. So we have to focus today on FTAs with the US and European Union. And let's look at the trade data first. So our exports to US in year 2025 were $92 billion. And last year we were all worried that monthly exports were going down from India to US because of Trump tariffs. But it pleasantly surprised me when I looked at the data January to December 2025, our export to US increased by 15% from $82 billion in 24 to $92 billion in 25. So it was a pleasant surprise for me. With EU, our exports are $74 billion. With both US and EU, we have trade surplus today. They are our top two export markets, and together they account for 37% of India's merchandise exports. That means FTAs with them is very important for us. So let's see what is there in these FTAs. So first we'll talk about FTA with the European Union, and then with the US. So European Union, 27th of January, we announced that conclusion of the negotiations. This is a new thing we have started doing. Earlier, when FTAs were being signed on the day we were getting all the documents, but now announcement comes, we don't have the documents. So announcement came and some information was shared by the government. And now about a week back, some documents were uploaded, but no tariff cut or PSR documents were uploaded. And so we are told that it will take 3-4 months time. After legal scrubbing, the agreement will be signed and then full documents will be uploaded. And it will take about 1 year because the agreement has to be ratified by the European Parliament to be implemented. So it's about 1.5 years away from the date of implementation when the first tariff cuts will take place. Now, let me come back to what this agreement contains. So the most important part of any free trade agreement is tariff cuts, because they offer immediate price cuts and immediately have impact on the exports of both the sides. So as we know that developed countries, their tariffs are not very high. So same is the case with the Europe. So average tariffs are 3.6%, and India's 30% of exports, they go to Europe without even FTA at zero tariffs. Next 20%, the tariff is less than 3%. So I say half the exports may not gain from this FTA-led tariff reductions. But remaining half is very important. Remaining half, the tariffs are very high. For example, tariffs on garments, textiles, and made-ups may be 10 to 12%, on shoes, about 17%, on toys, about 4%, on gold jewelry, 4%. So we hope that the tariff cut on these will increase our exports of labor-intensive goods. I saw, this Indian industry was asking the government to do the FTA with EU as soon as possible for past many years. I saw a report from Ministry of Textiles about 3-4 years back. It was listing recommendations for improving India's textile industry, not textile export, textile industry. And it contained about 50 recommendations. The first recommendation was do an FTA with EU. Now that time has come, so let's see what each country gains. So India, as we discussed, gains in about half of its exports, labor-intensive exports, and we are happy with that because the goods from Bangladesh, Vietnam, they were getting zero tariff access in the European market, not us. So our exporters were saying that they were being disadvantaged. Now that disadvantage will go and they will be getting some market share. What Europe gets, India is a high tariff country. Our average tariffs are about 16%. And so Europe will be getting tariff cuts in most of the items. And so their machinery, electronics, organic chemicals, most of them, they'll be coming to India at zero tariffs. And most talked about are tariffs on wines and spirits and the automobiles. Wines and spirits, our current tariffs are about 150%. For wines, they'll be coming down to 10 to 20%, from 150 to 20%. For whiskey, from 150% to 30%. On beer, from 150% to 40%. So it will be coming down. What is good in this FTA beyond the tariff cuts? So one thing we have to see that both the economies, India and Europe, they are different stages of development. They don't compete with each other on the product profile. For example, Europe exports upstream products. They export rough diamond, we buy from them, we polish them, export world over. They export metal scrap, we buy from them, we make steel, aluminum, we export world over. They export electronic components, we assemble into smartphones and many other electronic. So there is a value chain integration in this. So India is basically into labor-intensive goods or assembly of goods like electronics, smartphones, or processing of the petroleum fuels like we import crude oil and make petrol and diesel. Europe is not into any of these things. Europe is into capital intensive, high tech things, so machinery, aircraft, electronics, medical devices, those things. So that if India's exports to the Europe increases, there will be no hue and cry from the European industry. And same I can say about Indian industry. That's possibly the case. But so both the sides will gain from these tariff cuts. The value chain integration will be promoted. That's the highlight for me of this FTA. But I have two concerns on the product side. First is automobile. So I'm just laying before you my thoughts. So automobile, I was trying to get the information how many cars we import from European Union right now. So Minister of Commerce website, somehow some blockage is there. So I could get the latest data of 2024 from World Bank site. So it says India imported in 2024 8,000 cars from European Union. Now in this FTA, we allowed them a quota of 2.5 lakh cars. Those number of cars can come into India at 10% tariffs. So that means whatever they want to export, they can export. Right now, 8,000, it can become 80,000, 2 lakhs, 2.5 lakhs is there. So now what's the meaning of this? So my friend, when I talk to them, they say, for how long we are going to, why should we protect our automobile industry? For how long we should protect this? So my thoughts are like this. So far, in all our FTAs, before our FTA with the UK, we have not allowed any automobile to come from any country. We did FTAs with Japan, South Korea, ASEAN. Automobiles were not allowed. No duty cuts were allowed from them. Even though Japan, South Korea, they invested billions of dollars here. But that's the reason we have high tariffs, say 100 to 125%. Because of that, they invested here. Now we are a small car hub here. We are making good level of medium-sized cars also. But now once we allow UK or EU, now US already we are talking of giving concessions to them on automobiles, then what happens? Automobile sector is not a normal sector. It accounts for 1/3 of India's manufacturing GDP. It supports 4 crore jobs. 4 crore, when I say, you imagine the person sitting in a garage on a street anywhere in the country. So we have made a hole in the wall. Now hole will be expanded. How? We have committed to UK, EU, will be committing to US. Now soon we'll be getting letters from Japan, South Korea that we invested billions, you have not given us. You are giving to people who have not done anything to your country, give us that. So we'll be under tremendous pressure to open that. Once we open that, what happens? My friends say competitiveness will be good, it's good for consumers, but one more scenario is there. That scenario is what happened to Australia. So Australia in 1980s, 90% of the cars on Australian roads were built in Australia. 10 global companies, they were making cars in Australia. And the tariffs were 45%. Then one fine day, they thought that this is too obscene a tariff, it should be cut. So over the next few years, they cut the tariffs from 45% to 5%. And all the 10, they stopped manufacturing. All the car companies, they shut production. Right now, every single car on Australian road is imported. Not a single car company is there. Australian government is trying hard to woo them back, but nobody is coming back. So I'm not saying that this is going to happen to India, but I say trade agreements are not charity. If I'm getting $100, I'll give you $100. But I have to see if I'm getting $100, I should not be giving $1,000. So this is just a point of thought. And finally, I'll end this discussion with one elephant in the room, carbon tax. So you are aware that from January 1, European Union has started charging carbon tax under the scheme called Carbon Border Adjustment Measure, CBAM. So, so right now 6 products are covered. Mostly for India, products of importance are steel and aluminum. And so Indian exports going to Europe, they will have to pay carbon tax. When the full incidence is there in few years, the tax will be 25% to 40%. For aluminum, it could be 80% also. So imagine, right now 6 products are there. European Union is on record, CBAM regulation is on record. It says they are going to cover all industrial products by 2033 in CBAM. So what will happen? Post FTA, European products will be coming to India at zero tariffs. Our products will be paying CBAM. Mind you, their average tariffs are 3.6%. CBAM will be 20% to 35%. It will make nonsense of the FTA total. So it's an elephant in the room. Right now, some text is there in the FTA for solving this, but it has no meaning. I don't want to take your time explaining those things. It has no meaning. The firms which are exporting to EU, they have to pay, and they will have to pay the full amount that is due to them. The text in FTA doesn't help them. But so this is about the tariff cuts and merchandise exports. But there are 24 subjects in the EU FTA. There are many important subjects. So may I request my friend Abhijit to talk about the rest of the issues.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I'm grateful to Siraj Hussain sir for organizing this meeting, and I do find myself in very illustrious company of Kher sahab and Ajay Srivastava as well. So Ajay has laid down the ground about basic aspects of the tariff regime that will be in place pursuant to India-EU FTA. Ajay also made an important point that India's approach towards expanding its trade opportunities appears to be through FTAs. Ajay made at the end a very important point that the potential for expanding exports of goods to European Union is likely to get curtailed, not fully realized, on account of carbon border taxes. Now, the interesting thing about the FTA with European Union is that it contains chapters on something called sustainability, labor, gender, and environment. These chapters do many things, but two very important things they do. Number one, they open the doors for European Union in future to erect barriers to India's exports on grounds of Indian exporters not complying with requirements around labor, gender, and environment in European Union. At this juncture, we are only grappling with CBAM. But thanks to the FTA with European Union, we are opening the window for giving a legal right to the other side to impose similar other non-tariff barriers to our exports. The second important point to remember in respect of these sustainability chapters is that we are going to be giving the European Union a direct say in how we implement our domestic laws and regulations in these three sectors. Let me step back and take you to our FTA with UK. And why I want to do that is to just examine this point that is FTA the route to boost India's exports? Now, there we have a very good study by the UK government itself, which says that once the FTA with UK starts getting implemented, over 15 years' time, because of the FTA, bilateral trade of both goods and services will increase by 25 billion pounds, out of which 15 billion pounds will accrue to UK, 10 billion pounds to India. over a span of 15 years. This is not even a drop in the ocean. I'm afraid even if our exports to European Union increase despite carbon taxes or other restrictions that might get imposed on account of sustainability requirements, that itself will not give the significant boost to our exports. So the question is, from where should the boost to exports come? That has to come from domestic reform in terms of improving infrastructure, logistics costs, trade finance, etc. But that's a separate debate. The short point which I'm trying to make is that the entire approach of the past couple of decades, that FTA will impart a significant boost to Indian exports, requires a rethinking. Now let me come back to the FTA with European Union. If we look at one of the documents which the Department of Commerce has brought out, it says that in respect of intellectual property rights, the government will not be required to make any changes in our domestic laws and regulations. Now, when I look at the text of the FTA, whatever exists in the public domain today, the government appears to be right. But does that give us assurance that everything is hunky-dory? Absolutely not. What we've done in the FTA with European Union replicates what we did in the FTA with the EFTA countries, Switzerland, Norway, and a couple of others, where what we did was, to give you one illustration, and that's a very important area in respect of plant protection varieties. What we've done is, whatever exists in our domestic law, we bound it in the FTA. In other words, had the FTA not been there, we could have made changes to our domestic law in favor of farmers' rights. But now that we've bound our whatever exists in the domestic law through an FTA, initially with EFTA and now with the European Union, to that extent that we've tied our hands, we will not be able to bend in favor of our farmers. And that relates to the duration of protection for new plant varieties. Since we are talking of intellectual property rights, let me again go back to the FTA with UK, where there is a very, to my mind, a very difficult provision. What we've agreed in the FTA with UK is that the preferred and optimal route for access to medicines is something called voluntary licensing. Now, this has very far-reaching implications for access to medicine. By signaling that the optimal and preferred route for access to medicine is through voluntary licensing, we've given a policy signal that henceforth the government will not be considering compulsory licensing. So while legally on paper we retain the right to impose compulsory licensing, the future direction of policy is clear. Henceforth, no compulsory licensing, or in very, very rare situations, compulsory licensing. This will have huge implications for access to affordable medicine. And why I'm mentioning this is, in our discussions with US, we are likely to encounter similar demands from the US side. A last word on the FTA with European Union before I turn to the bilateral deal with US. Smita Purushottam ma'am is here. She's been doing phenomenal work in the area of digital sovereignty. Now, gradually we seem to be conceding ground on leveraging what is the real source of strength of India in the digital sector, which is data, and in particular, access to government data. While we've not made a specific commitment that government data will be shared with European Union on a national treatment basis, but the way the text is worded, it does open a window in that direction. And that can provide the template for deeper concessions being asked from us by US. So let me quickly conclude on European Union and shift to our bilateral trade deal with US. All of you would recall that on 13th February 2025, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Trump had a bilateral meeting wherein it was decided that the two sides would negotiate what was called a bilateral trade agreement. In legal terms, we don't know what a bilateral trade agreement is because under the rules of GATT and WTO, what's recognized as a customs union or a free trade agreement. What a bilateral trade agreement is, we really do not know. But over time, India became, as most other countries, we came at the receiving end of Trump's tariff turbulence. We were at the receiving end of a 25% reciprocal tariff, on top of which in August last year was added a 25% penalty for purchasing oil from Russia. And thereafter, sometime in February this year, early February this year, we had a joint statement between India and US, which had some very interesting elements. The joint statement said that very shortly we'll be concluding something called an interim agreement. What that interim agreement would contain, we do not know. The negotiations are still going on. But what the joint statement contains are pointers towards what the interim agreement might include. Now, the interesting aspects of the joint statement is that irrespective of the fine print in the interim agreement, structurally the interim agreement is likely to be imbalanced, asymmetric, for the following reasons. Number one, on a large number of products, industrial and agricultural, it appears that India has committed to bringing tariffs down to zero or reducing tariffs. What will the US do? When the joint statement came out in early February, the intention was that the reciprocal tariff on India would come down from 25% to 18%. And that would have been the lowest reciprocal tariffs on countries in the Asia region. So naturally, there was a narrative that we've done much better than our partners. And then suddenly we get the news that, well, Bangladesh in the textile sector might negotiate a zero duty access into US if they source cotton from US. Now, for us, a major gain from the interim agreement would have been getting slight tariff advantage in the textiles and clothing sector compared to our competitors. Now, once this news came, then that did create flutters amongst within the industry as well as those who have been watching this issue. And then subsequently, government came with a pronouncement that we would be seeking, or we've already got a dispensation in respect of textiles and clothing very similar to what exists for Bangladesh. We do not know the contours of what will happen. But if we are going to be getting a dispensation very similar to what prevails for Bangladesh, then we will get zero duty access into US for textiles and clothing, provided we source US cotton. We are already sourcing extra long staple cotton from US, which we don't grow in India. So if imports of the extra long staple cotton increases, Indian cotton growers will not get displaced. But the point is, in addition to extra long staple cotton, we also grow cotton of shorter staple length, and we import something similar from US. So if in the quest to get a zero duty access into US market for our textile exports, we have to import cotton which is of shorter length than extra long staple cotton, then there could be adverse implications for our cotton growers. Then coming back to the asymmetries and imbalances in the likely interim agreement, There's a commitment that India will purchase $500 billion worth of goods and services from US. There is no similar commitment from the US side. There's also a commitment whereby we will be recognizing US consignments in the agriculture sector in of certain product categories, provided they are accompanied with US certificates from the respective health authorities. So we will have to, those certification will override our domestic requirements. There's no commensurate commitment from the US side in terms of our export consignments of agricultural products. But the most problematic part, which is contained in the joint statement, is something called economic security alignment. Now, we do not know what exactly this will entail, but if we look at USA's recent agreements with Malaysia, Cambodia, Argentina, or Bangladesh and a few other countries, what economic security alignment could entail is that if for whatever grounds US imposes tariffs or imposes restrictions on exports of some other country, India will have to follow suit. If the partner country wants to negotiate something on digital products or digital trade, it can do so only after getting the nod from US. If a country wants to, if US imposes sanctions on certain entities of a third country, the FTA, the partner country will have to impose similar sanctions. So essentially, some of the policies related to trade and some economic matters, the partner country essentially will have to comply with what the US does. And yes.
So if the US says that China and Russia are its enemies, what India will be expected to do?
If US imposes restrictions on their trade or sanctions some of their national entities, we will have to follow suit. If the provision which is contained in US-Malaysia reciprocal trade agreement is replicated in the interim agreement with India. So effectively, in the trade technology war between US and China or US and Russia, we become intentionally or unintentionally a partner of US in its furthering its geopolitical objectives.
So what will happen to our relations with China and Russia in that case?
I need not elaborate on that. It is absolutely obvious. But thanks for raising that question. Then coming back to US, I will take 3-4 minutes more. When the joint statement was issued, it was generally hailed that it would create certainty, predictability for our businesses. Now, in today's environment, when Trump does not respect almost anything to do with international law, to think that whatever tariffs he says he will impose on India today will not change tomorrow is unrealistic. And second, whatever concessions he may give us today might appear good to us, but if he gives deeper concessions to our competitors, then where are we? So again, this promise of predictability, certainty being created by the interim agreement, I am not sure how far those would really materialize. Then in the area of digital sector, the US recent agreement on reciprocal trade contain many provisions which effectively what they do is prevent the partner countries from taxing US entities in the digital sector, require a commitment on free flow of data across borders, do not include an explicit commitment on sharing of government data, but that may not be too far behind. And most importantly, they require a commitment on an issue which is at the WTO, something called moratorium on customs duties on electronic commerce. I will not go into the detail of that, but countries who had been opposing this issue at the WTO, they have fallen in line. Whether India will also fall in line remains to be seen. Let me turn to one of the most contentious parts of the joint statement, which is on agriculture. Now, what the joint statement appears to suggest is that in respect of some agriculture products, India will be reducing or bringing down tariffs to zero. The good part is that cereals do not appear to be included in this list. But based on news reports plus what has been appearing from the government, it appears that we have given a commitment to allow certain quantities of some fruits, some nuts at lower tariffs, something called through a tariff rate quota. And if you look at the prices, which the base price which is mentioned in some of the statements emerging from the government, then the base price may not be adequate to protect the interests of some of the fruit growers, particularly apples. A last point in agriculture. US is not a major rice exporter, but for whatever reasons, the US lobby group on rice, which is interestingly called US Rice, has been going hammer and tongs against our minimum support price scheme for rice. And if you look at the fact sheet, not the fact sheet, the statement which the USTR came out after something called the reciprocal tariffs being thrown out, that statement said that we will now be starting investigations against countries for their unfair trade practice, and their rice has been singled out. So don't be surprised if we come under considerable pressure from the US to have a relook at our MSP scheme. Although at this juncture, going by what is contained in the joint statement, there is no such indication. But if you look at historically the US grievances against India, rice has appeared very prominently, and this gets reiterated in the statement by the USTR after the US lost the Supreme Court case on reciprocal tariffs. I'm going to stop at that. And Ajay, could you now take it forward from what lies ahead in the US context after the basis on which the reciprocal tariffs was imposed, something called International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA. Once that was thrown out by the US Supreme Court, what lies ahead?
Thanks. So joint statement said that US will be cutting its reciprocal tariffs from 25% to 18% for India. And in return, India will be granting many things, which Abhijit has narrated. So what are the next steps? So it's not written anywhere, but news reports suggest that US said that within 2 weeks of 6 Feb, they will be issuing an order notifying tariffs coming down from 25% to 18%. And by mid-March, India will be laying out a product-wise list of specific concessions granted to US. But before any of this could happen, there was almost a bombshell in the Trump's strategy. So US Supreme Court on 20th of February, it issued a very clear order. It said that the reciprocal tariffs which Mr. Trump was using, that tariff is not allowed under the act, that is the International Emergency Economic Power Act. It's not allowed to be used for that. International Emergency Economic Power Act allows the use of import restrictions in case of national emergency. Mr. Trump said that high trade deficit is a national emergency. So court disagreed with him. It's not only the Supreme Court, the lower two courts, the US Court of International Trade and the Federal Court, also passed verdict against the Trump's reciprocal tariffs. Supreme Court finally put a stamp on the decision of the lower courts. With this killed Trump's entire strategy. Now these tariffs under this act IAEPA, they gave Trump tremendous power. He could impose tariffs whatever he wanted on a country. Uh, he said he is imposing to solve the problem of trade deficit, but with Australia, US has trade surplus. Still, Australia got the tariffs, reciprocal tariffs. He could pick up a number and stick on that country. Now, with this gone, countries are asking 3, 4 questions. So, Mr. Trump imposed these tariffs in April, May, June, and July, 3, 4 months' time. And he used these high tariffs to pressure countries to enter into a quick trade agreement with the US. The bargain was that US will be reducing some of these reciprocal tariffs. Say for India, it was 50%, from 50% to whatever 18%. For EU, 25% to 15%. Japan, Korea also 15%. And in return, he will be seeking countries to eliminate tariffs on most of the US products, committing billions of dollars of hundreds of billions of dollars of investments, committed purchases, and so many else. But after the Supreme Court verdict, the country is asking 3 questions. One is, before that, as soon as the order came, within hour there was a panic in Trump camp, and he imposed another tariff, new tariff, in hurry, at the rate of 10%. It was imposed under Section 122 of Trade Act 1974, and it was to be universal tariff. So all countries will be paying, instead of the earlier reciprocal tariff which varied country to country, all countries will be paying 10% tariffs. So Supreme Court outlawed the reciprocal tariffs and introduction of new 10% tariffs. Now all countries with who have done trade deals with the US, like Japan, South Korea, European Union, or in the process of doing so, like India, they had one question. 3 questions. First is, I was getting 18%, India is asking. Now I am getting 10%. So doing a trade deal, giving so much to US was offering 18%. Now I'm getting 10%. Second, 10% is same for everyone. I was happy with 18% even though it was higher, because China was getting higher than 18%. Bangladesh was 19%. Vietnam was 20%. So our tariffs were lower, so some competitive edge was there. And third, countries who did not have a trade agreement with the US, they also have to pay 10%. So the question is, what's the need for this trade agreement? When without a trade deal, you have to pay 10%. With a trade deal, you have to pay 10%. So countries are trying to understand. So EU has come out in open. They are saying these are unfair tariffs, and they are almost written on the sand. Japan, they are very reticent in speaking, but they also express their concern. Australia finds these tariffs totally unfair. India, as usual, we are totally silent about what we are intending to do in future about these things, but whole of the world is talking about these things. And it's very difficult to explain to your domestic constituency why you are doing a deal with US when US is not giving you anything. When reciprocal tariffs were there, some fig leaf was there, 25 to 18%, okay. But something was there in your hand. Right now, nothing. Do a deal, don't do a deal, nothing is there. So Trump is realizing this. And you must have noticed that immediately after Supreme Court judgment came, he started issuing very terse statements. And once he said, anybody who is playing smart with the stupid Supreme Court judgment, they will be punished with the higher tariff, much higher tariffs than they have been imposed. They should not dare go away. If anyone has done deal or committed a deal, one should not be allowed to walk away. His junior officers, their language was more acidic and disparaging to all countries. They were openly threatening. So why they are threatening? Because they don't have anything, no carrot to offer. So from carrot they are coming to stick, that's an empty threat only. So some countries will take that threat. I don't know whether will be that country or not. Most will not take, most will walk out. That's my impression today. So this is where we are, and let's see what happens. Abhijit, closing point from you.
No, you've, Ajay, said it very clearly. Just one point on Trump's strategy. Trump's strategy is create uncertainty, get countries into competition to give him their best concessions. And how does he do that? By imposing different levels of tariffs on countries. At this juncture, there's a 10% across the board tariffs. How will he end up imposing different level of tariffs? By invoking something called Section 301. That will take time, but he can always accelerate the process. So what we are likely to be seeing in the coming few months is findings under Section 301, which will say that, well, country A pursues unfair trade practices which adversely impact US businesses. Hence, I impose X% tariff, country Y, similar unfair trade practices, Y% tariff. And this is how he will again make the tariff levels different for different countries, and then again get countries into what I would say competitive appeasement under coercive economic policy making. Yeah.
Thanks, Abhijit. I should cover this. In fact, when reciprocal tariffs were outlawed, countries have to evaluate what other options Trump has. So first, he imposed tariffs at the rate of 10% under Section 122 of Trade Act 1974. That act allows Trump to impose tariffs up to the rate of 15% for 150 days. After that, it requires congressional approval. But these tariffs are challenged from the day one. Experts say that these tariffs they can be imposed only when the US is facing balance of payment problem. US is not facing balance of payment problem. When they disassociated dollar with the gold in 1973, after that there is no BOP problem with US. So they say it's going to be challenged. In 1 week or 2 weeks, this will go. Other options, two more options are there. One is Section 232, in which he imposed 50% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and he may be adding more. But that can be imposed only when US is under national emergency. So Mr. Trump can justify that steel imports, the rise in steel import, aluminum import is national emergency, so be it. But he doesn't have power to charge differential tariff on different countries. If he is charging 50%, he has to charge from every country. So he has limited option. No. Third is, as Abhijit rightly said, is Section 301 of Trade Act 1974. This has been their favorite act section for the past many administrations. They are currently imposing it on some of the Chinese products. For India in 2022, they faulted us for levying 2% digital transaction tax, which we later on removed. In 2014-15, they started some investigations against us in Section 301 for our Patent Act. They were finding some problem with our Patent Act. So they can do this, but none of the act currently empowers them to impose a tariff which is sweeping. So Section 301, he has to say that India is stopping my exports, and he has to, if he has to punish India, it has to be to that extent only. Similarly, for Section 232, it has to be same for all countries. So experts are of view that right now in US arsenal, there is no act which authorizes them to impose sweeping tariffs like he did, and he has no other chances. He realizes this. That's why he is issuing threats.
Thanks, Ajay. One final word. If we look at the landscape of FTAs with developed countries plus what is likely on the anvil in respect of US, then what emerges is something like a grand bargain. I would term it instead as a Faustian bargain. What do we get? We get possibility of increasing our exposure to developed country markets. What do we concede? In two areas, the concessions are not likely to hit us immediately, but they will hit us over next few years in the area of intellectual property rights, and second, in the area of digital trade. Digital trade will be one of the most vibrant economic area of economic activity, and the concessions that we may end up giving through the FTAs can come to haunt us a few years down the line. So I'm going to stop at that, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for very kindly listening to us.
So thank you, both the speakers. I would only like to say before we have questions and answers that even before Trump administration came, US has been challenging India in WTO. And it is not only rice, they have challenged us on wheat, they have challenged us on sugar cane, they have challenged us on sugar, they have challenged us on cotton. And a number of congressmen had also written letters. We have written about it. I think all three of us have written about it. So it is not new, it is only that now it has taken a very serious turn, and we do not know how this framework of agreement, etc., will be finally negotiated into a deal. So that's it from my side, and now we are open for discussion. Kher Saab will have the last word. Would you like to say anything?
As you plan.
No, whatever you want. You are the chair.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Siraj, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, IIC. This is, of course, a very hot topic, and it's been a hot topic for quite some time now. As a matter of fact, trade has never been the darling of international fora, national media, and so on and so forth. Every discussion these days somehow zeroes in on trade issues. Much of it, I realize, conflagrates for two reasons. One, that those who are presenting trade issues don't have enough time to give you the whole story. Two, that willy-nilly trade gets into politics. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to speak, Siraj, with your permission, I'm going to speak, to say something in three parts. The first is, let me build a slight framework to appreciate what an FTA is. Two, I would respond to the developments as far as the US-India FTA, BTA that's being talked about. And three, I'll respond to some of the areas which very able speakers have touched upon, but I would have my views, so I'll just share that with you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let us be very clear. International trade is not a non-political game. It is a politico-economic game. International trade relations are built around international relations. It is not a surprise that most often FTA-related discourse gets nuanced by the political climate of the day. Whether it was 2002 to 2008 when India signed a few agreements, whether it was 2008 to 2011 when India signed three very relevant agreements, and whether it is now from 2021 to 2025, 6, when again a set of agreements have been signed. Let us be very clear about one thing, that all of them have been nuanced by the politics of the day. But that is, I am not saying that they have been driven by the politics of the day, but they have definitely been nuanced by the politics of the day. And as we know very clearly, and I think I need to bring it very clearly, that the three tranches of agreements that we have done, India has done, the first tranche was essentially India getting its neighborhood right, getting agreements with the South Asian countries. That was the first set of agreements. Singapore was an exception, but Singapore, being a large investor in India, a potentially large investor, was also part of that process. Then we had a series of agreements with countries which were East Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries, the ASEAN, Korea, and Japan. And this was definitely nuanced by the then government's approach on looking east. It was a perception, and in my view, right perception, not about the FTA, I'm talking about looking east, that India needs to pay greater attention towards economic integration with Eastern economies, because as Asia was emerging as a manufacturing powerhouse, Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia were playing, ASEAN were going to play, were already playing, and were going to play even a greater role in the construct of South Asia, construct of Asia, and India wanted to be part of that. Why India did not benefit out of those agreements to the extent that it should have was for a different reason. The reason was that it was presumed that signing an agreement is be all and end all. That's not the case. Free trade agreements are simply institutional mechanisms. They are pieces of paper on which countries sign their intent of doing something. That intent of doing something is manifested by domestic responses to what you have committed and by international responses to what you have sought by way of commitment from others. Now, unfortunately, in that set of agreements, the domestic reforms which were expected, most of them did not happen. For a variety of ways, that's a different subject, and I don't want to touch upon that at the moment. And therefore, we were not able to harvest those agreements to the extent that we should have. And now you have and I can go on this, but I am aware of the time. And then you have the third set of agreements, which have been manifested in two tranches. One was a set of agreements with Mauritius, Australia, and UAE, and then Oman, UK, EU, and this so-called BTA of US. And again, friends, this is a manifestation of India's economic needs, but definitely nuanced by the politics of the day. So let this be very clear. It is not something which a government succumbs or a government doesn't succumb. Let us be very objective in this. Because if you feel that a government of this day is succumbing, then the government of that day, what was that doing? So let's not get into that. Let's see what benefits and whether we responded to that or not. We did not respond the manner in which we should have responded to the series of those three agreements in terms of domestic reforms to the extent that we should have. Possibly they were ahead of time, maybe, I don't know. Now, the underlying point here is that we are going through a terribly turbulent geopolitical evolution. There are people here sitting who are far more educated and far more experienced than me to speak on this, but we are aware that the manner in which geopolitics is developing, a country like India with very little leverage except the market that it offers, and a potentiality of human resource, it has nothing else to offer. The second point which we need to understand is that if your ambitions of economic prosperity that politically you want, so your political aspirations and economic ambitions have to come together, then you necessarily have to expand your market. Because the 140 billion market is a multi-layered market. A significant part of this market at the lower level is not conducive enough to buy goods and services which are produced at higher value in the overall value context. And therefore you need markets outside to give you that scale support which is necessary to make you competitive. You cannot be competitive, and you have seen a recent example. Apple is the most recent example where we have seen that within 5 years or 4 years of policy change in the subsidy program, in the production-linked incentive program around mobile phones, today Apple has turned out to be the largest exporter, $24 billion worth of mobile phones. So you can very well see how these kinds of policy-induced changes in the manner in which manufacturing is done can bring in prosperity. Now, the third, therefore, in this times, it is necessary for us to continuously think of expanding the markets, because your own market, which is your trump as a matter of fact, but is not big enough at the moment for all kinds of products. Yes, for garments and textiles, it may be, but it will not bring the value. The value will come only when that same garment goes out and brings a greater value, because it is made to a different standard and made to a different design and made to a different choice. It brings a greater value. And with the kind of minimum the wage that you pay here, your competitiveness is significantly improved. So let this be very clear. Your competitiveness is the crux. This is the background. I can go on and on. FTA offers you this opportunity of expanding that market. Now, from a pure hardcore economics perspective, I accept that FTA will not be the best alternative for seeking this. The best alternative undoubtedly is the multilateral trade arrangement, because it gives a level playing field to everyone. And therefore, I don't compete with you. I compete with you only on the basis of my own competitiveness, but not on this tariff advantage, etc. So if that is not there, and we know WTO, what is happening to it, and this is not the time for me to speak on that, we will have no option but the second option. And the second option is expanding market. The second point we need to understand is that our competitors have very regularly, significantly, and very thoughtfully have stitched these agreements with several other markets. As a consequence, their markets have become larger than the markets that we cater to. Whether CPTPP, whether RCEP, whether other smaller regional affiliations, they all have expanded markets for those members, which luxury we don't have. There are disadvantages also. Again, that's a subject which is for discussion for maybe some other day. But the fact is that unless markets are expanded, we will not be able to take advantage of scales, and scales make us competitive. That was the first point. Let that be out. One can go on, but I wanted that to be clear. The second point, US. The US bilateral trade agreement is the biggest joke going around. Just for the sake of information of those who may not be knowing, according to the international trade law, a country is bound by a tariff that on a product that it has committed in the WTO in a certain year. There is a schedule, and that country has committed to that product in that year. So if I have committed to this bottle, this product, glass bottle at 5%, or let's say 20% of tariff, that only means that I will never put a tariff of more than 20% on this product. That doesn't stop me from applying only 5%. So I can say bound tariff 20%, applied tariff 5%. So when I trade with a partner, he comes at 5%. But it gives me the freedom of going up to 20%. So that is the advantage. Now, when the FTAs happen, they happen at applied tariff basis. They don't happen at the bound tariff basis. But with WTO going where it is, Mr. Trump knows that his bound tariffs, and let me tell you that American applied tariff on industrial products range between 2 to 3%. So as a matter, and so I don't exactly know what was the bound tariff generally, but whatever it is certainly less than 18% and 15% and 10%. So as a matter of fact, Mr. Trump could not have imposed tariffs above the bound tariff. So all this hullabaloo which has been created is completely illegal. Unfortunately, WTO's judicial system is in complete shambles, and therefore, despite a challenge by a few countries, it has not gone anywhere. It will not go. So he is taking advantage of that, and he's taking advantage of the belligerence of his approach in everything. And he knows that his military might is so strong that nobody, we thought European Union at that point in time would at least speak something. But the manner in which they went under, I mean, who else has the power? Only one country has the power, which has, and because it has leverage. It has leverage, and therefore it has shown seen into the eyes of Mr. Trump. But that unfortunately has given, taken the discourse to another direction of so-called G2. And again, I don't want to get into that. So, therefore, Mr. Trump has used this opportunity, taken out an act, Ajay mentioned about Indian Trade Act of 1974, and put a tariff. Some sort of a calculation was done which was useless, but that calculation and country after country has been imposed with that tariff, and then several changes have taken place. He called it reciprocal tariff. I don't want to repeat that because we are all aware of this. So coming to what Ajay said, coming to the latest, Supreme Court. Now, Supreme Court has clearly said that Mr. Trump, the President of America, is not empowered to impose tariff by way of import regulation, which is what he's supposed to do under the IEEPA. That was the part, that was the business that Congress could have done. So he could not have done that. Now, so he has picked up another act, and now Trade Expansion Act, and now he says that that allows 10% or 15% maximum. He did 10% one day. Obviously, if India negotiated a tariff on that 50% that was imposed on India, and India brought it down after negotiation to 18%, and now if the mother tariff is 10% or 15%, then India's negotiation with US, in my view, are non-est, because they were on a basis which has been proved by the Supreme Court that it was wrong basis. And since India has no leverage, India is very politely buying time. India cannot say that we will not do. Even Europe took 7 days, 10 days, 7 days, I think, to speak that, what Ajay said. So India is not saying anything. India is saying we have postponed it, Darpan will not go, we will do this, we will do that. What else can India do? So India has postponed that negotiation to move forward, whether it's interim agreement that Abhijit spoke of. Nothing was clear in that joint statement. It was a unilateral statement. It hardly deserved to be called joint statement. America was treating and has been treating every other country like a stepney of a tire, of a car. And actually, it is unfortunate that we have to succumb to these situations, but that apart. So as far as US agreement is concerned, I don't want to get deeper into that because the basis is wrong, number one. Number two, India negotiated a higher tariff, but now the basis has gone, therefore that higher tariff has no relevance. Fresh negotiations would be required, even if this 15% tariff which has been imposed is only for 5 months. Then the Congress has to take it. And if this Congress has to take it, by then November will come, there will be elections. Mr. Trump is buying time till November. And I think maybe countries like India and others are also wanting to do that. We don't know. There's nothing that we have been told. Now let me come to Europe. Europe agreement has been under negotiations since 2007. The negotiations halted first, I think, in 2009 and then in 2013. And then they were picked up again. For a long time, the present government was anti-FTAs. They, till about 2021, there was a strong vocal opposition to FTAs. But then geopolitics and whatever internal thinking would have happened, government suddenly reoriented itself and did a half agreement with Australia. I say half because that's not the whole of the agreement, that it is sort of an early harvest. And then in 24, 25, we saw suddenly 3 critical agreements. Till then, Australia, UAE, and Mauritius, they were relatively, in my view, peripheral agreement. UAE, of course, is an anthropo, so an agreement can play a part there. Australia, well, there was a complementarity, except dairy. There was a complementarity. So Australia, in any case, would have been a good agreement. They didn't need an agreement, sorry. Now coming to these 3 agreements. UK, EU definitely are sought after markets for India. They are sought after markets because of the huge amount of wage goods that we produce at much cheaper rates. But unfortunately, our competitors got better tariff deals. Bangladesh, Vietnam, by virtue of certain provisions of the European law, Vietnam because of the bilateral trade agreement, Bangladesh because of a certain provision for LDCs in their law, got very low duties or zero duties on most of these wage goods, whereas India had to pay the normal tariff. And therefore, this agreement will very strongly benefit the entire segment of low skill wage goods, textiles, garments, apparels, footwear, etc., etc. That is a very distinctive advantage, and I think that advantage, if it is nurtured and harvested well, can give a significant return to us. The second area is the higher technology area, and there we are hoping. And when I say we are hoping, I mean I'm not speaking on behalf of the government or the signatories. I'm just telling you as India. We are expecting that this will bring in European technology. This will bring in European investment. This will create India-Europe value chains. There are significant numbers of leading brands in Europe, and therefore we can build those value chains. And please, 2 things which I have forgotten to speak about was the relevance of value chains. Every trade deal today must answer this need, that unless a trade deal builds a value chain, it is of no advantage to a country, particularly the lesser country, the lesser developed country. So that is very important. The second thing is investment. If a trade deal is not promoting investment, it will only have a marginal utility. Therefore, it is expected that this agreement will hopefully bring in that. Now, please remember, this agreement is happening at a time when Europe has been shown the door by the Americans, when India doesn't have a leverage, and therefore they have also looked at it from a political perspective. That this was a good response to the US. And some of you may recall that the day this agreement was announced, the next day there was a statement by the American president against it. I mean, why should the American president be taking a note of this agreement and making a statement? He made it because he was feeling about it. So this agreement definitely has answered a very important need of the country. Yes, there are prices to be paid. No agreement, trade agreement, can be just a take-take agreement or a give-give agreement. This is a give-and-take agreement. And mind you, an agreement with European Union, you have only crossed the first layer. Now begins the real game. The real game is your product doesn't go into EU just by itself. Tariff is only the first gate. The second gate is the non-tariff. And non-tariff in EU is a huge dimension. And therefore, India, unfortunately, whatever has come out so far doesn't show that India has negotiated any non-tariff framework for its products of choice. So the first thing is India must negotiate a framework for product of its choice, which is a huge framework. I don't want to spend time on that because people who understand trade would know that. So that is the first. The second layer is what was mentioned by both of them, was the sustainability layer. The sustainability layer is something India has started getting into. It's warming up to that, but now comes the time of action, because that chapter is subject to a dispute settlement process, which is a relatively milder dispute settlement process through consultation, etc. But it is important. So therefore, now this is where the action lies. And it is in this context that CBAM, Ajay spoke about, the EUDR, the deforestry related directive of EU, and several other directives which are coming. There is a corporate due diligence directive and some others are also coming. So all of this will come. Now, to what extent India is prepared to deal with them is the biggest challenge in my opinion. So there are two challenges: how to make EU's market access more effective by cutting down our responses to non-tariff measures of EU, number one. Number two, how do we deal with these sustainability related challenges? I think all of the domestic reforms which must follow from this must take into account all of these issues. One can go on and on, so I don't want to take more time. I have just tried to add to what Abhijit and Ajay have said, but I'm sure if you want to add to this, Abhijit, Ajay, please do so. But I think it was necessary for me to say this because very often what happens is that FTAs are taken as standalone tools. They are not standalone tools. See, this is the mistake we did with the earlier three agreements. I'm not saying those were great agreements, but this was a mistake we did. We thought that up to humne FTA kar liya, now let's sit, now we'll get the market access. But we didn't. It's impossible to send a medicine to Japan. In Japan, how does your pill look? How does your tablet looks like? That is a winning criterion. You can't send medicines just by signing an agreement with Japan. And we did pay no attention to that. And there were many, many more things. So if we want to take advantage of these agreements, we will have to do all of this, the two layers that I spoke of. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Kher. Thank you. So now we are open for discussion. Yeah.
Good evening, sir.
Please use the mic. Huh? Please use the mic.
I am Arulanand. This question is relating to Ajay Srivastava, sir, regarding the car imports and exports to EU. The EU makes generally Benz, BMW, Audi, Porsche, and India makes like Tata, Mahindra, Suzuki, and all. And in my understanding, and you said that 8,000 cars and all those things. Sir, regarding export, if you see EU, they import a lot of cars from China, mostly electrical car, because of their own Euro standards and all this thing. Anyway, there is a criticism against EU that they are setting standards and they are suffering. The local manufacturing suffers. So my question is that, sir, how will this trade deal with the EU will benefit Indian exports to Europe? I believe Europe will not import IC engines from India. It will have to be electric cars. So will that be a good platform for Indian car exporters to Europe? Thank you. And how will it replace Chinese thing with European Union?
Hi, good evening. Myself, Binay Gupta. I am the founder and CEO of a strategic advisory firm, Geosynthesis. Abhijit, when you spoke about the need to reevaluate the prevalent approach of FTAs being the default mechanism to boosting exports, given the bipartisan unanimity in US politics today around not using WTO, multilateralism effectively dead at various levels, given the geopolitics of the world, what other mechanisms beyond FTA, plurilateral level, bilateral level, do we have to pursue exports growth? And Mr. Srivastava, a quick comment come question. When you spoke about concerns around us opening up our automobile industry to significantly higher level of imports, at a meta principle level, does that not reflect a persistence around protectionism? If we want to trade more with the world, we have to also be willing to accept, buy and sell. Trade operates on that principle, right? If you could reflect on that. Thank you.
Harshvardhan, would you like to say something?
No, if I start, I'll speak like Rajeev. So I would like to hear various things.
On cars, Mr. Srivastava, would you respond?
My honest response is I don't know the answer.
Okay, on cars, let me say one thing. ICE is the prevalent version today. What we have to keep our eyes on is not exports. How will the FTA with European Union prevent a vibrant domestic EV industry? I think that's the question we need to ask. And there we will have to see what is the extent of opening we are giving for EVs from European Union. I think, and also maybe with US, we don't know that. So exports is one strand, but to my mind, more important will be, will the FTA with European Union constrain development of our domestic EV sector? And if you look at the floor price, which is floating around in the media, then maybe the EV of Mahindras might get impacted at this juncture. Okay, could I respond to other questions? With WTO dead, what options do we have? Now, let me link this with what Kher Sahab said, that India has no leverage. I think we had a very important leverage, but for whatever reason, we did not use it with US, and that leverage was intellectual property right. Remember, WTO is a composite agreement. It's a grand bargain whereby we secured the right to retain high tariffs. US, European Union gave up their right to retain high tariffs, but what did they gain in return? Intellectual property rights. Since US has shown complete disdain for the tariff part, why should we continue to respect US IPRs? It needed just a spark from any one or two countries on IPRs. That would have given us some leverage. Of course, the response from US would have been that, okay, we will hit back at your services. There could have been a further calibrated response to that. But to my mind, we missed a trick by not retaliating against US once US started imposing reciprocal tariffs. And this is not theoretical, mind you. When under President Trump's first administration, US imposed illegal steel and aluminum tariffs, India retaliated. So why did we not retaliate this time? Why did we not retaliate in IPR sector? Now, that was the question on leverage. Coming back to your question, apart from FTAs, I mentioned in passing that FTAs will give us increased exports, no doubt about it. But to what extent that will happen will depend on, as Kher Sahab said, to European Union, how we are able to navigate the sustainability requirements. In addition, let's bear in mind that our price competitiveness is in a way made worse because of costs on account of infrastructure deficiencies, logistics, trade, red tape in customs procedures, import-export procedures, high cost of finance. If we are able to address some of these, that perhaps would give us a much bigger boost to our exports than FTAs. So FTA is certainly an important component, but a bigger boost can come through our some of the domestic reforms in this sector. And maybe I should respond to a couple of questions from Dr. Shalini Bhutani on YouTube. She says that an agreement on geographical indications is also being negotiated. This has implications for agriculture products too. Yes, some negotiations are happening on geographical indications, but what are the specific contours in respect of the negotiation with European Union? These have not been concluded, but what is apprehended is that some of the cheese which is manufactured by Amul, European Union would seek to get a GI in the Indian market and get it protected. So that could have some adverse implications for Amul. But at this juncture, let me confess, those negotiations are not concluded and we do not know the contours of what will happen on geographical indications with European Union. Dr. Bhutani has raised a very pertinent second question. While we are negotiating free trade agreements, the government is currently amending the Seed Act actually. Now this is important because some of the commitments that we make in FTAs are related to our Plant Protection Varieties Act. Now, I mentioned earlier that government's approach is that, well, because of the FTA commitments, no changes required in domestic laws and regulations. But what do you say to a situation where before the FTA gets announced, we make amendments to our domestic laws and regulations, and those amendments are precisely what are contained in the FTAs? Not theoretical. This is what happened in our negotiations with EFTA countries in respect of something called disclosure requirements in respect of working of patents. So what we need to guard against is changes in our domestic laws and regulations. We pretend that these are done autonomously of FTA negotiations, but eventually those changes are what our trading partners might be demanding in negotiations. So we need to have a careful look at what changes we bring about in the Plant Protection Varieties Act, Seeds Act, and what commitments we are making in those areas in the free trade agreements.
Yes, ma'am.
Abhijit, I just wanted to ask you, in the negotiations with US, have we given any concessions regarding GM food imports? I know you mentioned that we have agreed to import some fruit and nuts, but you didn't mention anything about GM. Was it intentional or is it not yet decided?
Okay. Ajay would be able to respond in greater detail, but let me mention two important aspects here. There is no explicit mention of GM anywhere in the agreement, but the story doesn't end there, and that's the interesting part. There is some commitment by India to address what US says long-standing barriers to exports of agriculture and food products. What could some of these long-standing barriers be? Could include GM. Even if it doesn't include GM, I mentioned that the agreement between Malaysia and US and similar other agreements of US with some of the other countries regarding reciprocal tariffs has a very interesting provision. What it says is that for certain category of products, if the US export consignment is accompanied with a required certificate of the US health authorities, then the importing country is mandated to accept those consignments. So there's no mention of GM, but if the US health authority gives the certificate for GM products, the other country is mandated to accept it. Now we have to guard against similar provision creeping into our agreement with US if we want to keep out GM. Ajay, you would like to add something. You have done a lot of work in the area of dairy sector and uh, which may not be that directly GM, but it has similar connotations.
Not much clarity is there at this point of time. Ministry of Commerce is saying it has not been allowed, but we have allowed explicitly the DDGS. It's a soybean oil cattle feed, and it comes from corn and soya, and that in US invariably is always GM. So I think we are allowing for this product, but government is saying no, so we have to wait for the clear thing.
But as I said explicitly, there is nothing mentioned which says that we've allowed GM. And let me take the worst case scenario. What US might want from us, and here I'm going back to the US annual litany of complaints against each country's trade policies. In respect of GM, what US says in India is that India does not have a predictable regulatory regime. So while they may not require a commitment that India will allow XYZ US GM products, the commitment which might be sought from us is that, okay, you specify timelines within which you will take a decision on allowing various entry of various GM products in your country. That could be a possibility.
Sir, if you permit, I just want to add one point on GM. India has permitted import of GM oil, that is soybean oil is permitted, while soya bean is not permitted. The Genetic Engineering Approval Committee has already allowed it. So if oil comes from US, it is not banned in India, but the bean cannot come.
It's already been coming from Argentina, US, and other countries. So, but now cattle feed will come in the form of DDGS. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
Hello. I have a question to Mr. Das regarding the EU, the problem that may occur in terms of sustainability, labor, gender, environment that you mentioned. I'm trying to play a devil's advocate here, but I'm trying to understand, should we not then make our domestic situation around these topics slightly better and look at economic development rather than only at economic growth, which I feel at the moment we are focusing on? Also, to give context, I work in the fashion industry, and technically the fashion industry, fashion and textile industry, and I lost a very big project because of the tariffs in September, October. So, we looked at ways that what we could perhaps do, and we were in negotiations with companies like Gap, Gant, Levi's, who still come and say that within the region, they still trust India more on issues of sustainability rather than that of Bangladesh or, if not the Far East, but yeah.
Okay. The problem in having sustainability related standards that I mentioned earlier is you're opening a window to give the other country a legal right to restrict your exports. So what if we do it ourselves? You do it autonomously, domestically, but for heaven's sake, do not take a commitment, even best endeavor, in the FTA. Domestically, you do whatever you want to do, whatever compliances you want to do it, but do not put it in the FTA. It's not just about standards. Let me give you in respect of gender, and Sangeeta has written a fabulous article on the implications of the gender chapter in EU on India. Now, what we need to remember is that these three chapters, labor, gender, environment, most of the provisions are best endeavor. But best endeavor provisions give the other side a right to create legal hurdles. Not only that, each of these three chapters has a well laid down structured mechanism for way ahead through committees. And that is where it's going to result in India, if India is not careful, conceding huge ground. Let me give you the illustration of gender. Why is there a gender chapter? Is it about women's development? I would speculate not. The main reason why gendered chapters exist in trade agreements is to make sure that the wage differential between male and female workers, that gets disciplined through trade agreements. Now, if you look at the gender chapter in EU or the gender chapters of Canada's FTAs, you will not have it specifically in terms of obligations, but in terms of subsequent committee work, all of them have it. So if we are not careful, what the other side wanted to extract in terms of concessions from us, we might end up giving those concessions through the subsequent work program, which will happen once the FTA starts getting implemented. But to cut a long story short, autonomously, domestically, companies should do whatever they can to comply with the European requirements, but putting those compliance requirements as legal obligation now or as part of something which will be agreed through a subsequent work program under committees, that I think is fraught with risks.
So that is the last question, yes.
Sir, recently for a few years now, corn is converted to ethanol and is very mandatory for 20%. So do you think it is, poultry is also being deprived of this corn seeds? And genetically modified will be having same impact on this corn, or poultry will be having the same impact, some consequences to health of poultry also?
You see, as far as ethanol import is concerned, there is no commitment as yet.
Corn import for ethanol.
Corn import, as of now, corn is not supposed to be included in the agreement. So they may be pushing for export of ethanol itself, but that will put our entire ethanol industry in doldrum anyway. So thank you very much. I think the first and the immediate impact will be on car industry, which will be very visible because of the large size of our industry and because of the preference of the richer classes to have imported cars. Even today, I see a lot of BYD cars from China, electric cars from China on the roads in Delhi and Bombay, even though there is no FTA and tariff is very high, but people are prepared to pay full tariff for importing these high quality cars.
And in the case of EU, in the case of EU, though the quota is 250,000, but there is a threshold value. So cars of that price and above will only be allowed to be imported. So it's not that they are competing against your, the small cars. They will be all competing in the luxury on mid-upper luxury.
And that's why, sir, I mentioned that when it comes to EVs, the threshold has been pegged at such a level that only Mahindra EVs will get impacted at this juncture.
No, but I think, Rajeev, all the cars above 25 lakhs are going to be impacted. And as far as I know, a lot of cars being sold in India are in that category. So I think
that will be very good. You will get the cars cheaper. जिन लोगों की 25 लाख होगी वो 23 लाख कर देंगे.
So thank you very much. Thank you, India International Center, for hosting this fascinating discussion, and thank you, Arcus, for webcasting it.